levy taxes against us, and then you out of here. Okay, so it's 8:33, so let's begin. Thank you, Arky, for having your camera on. At least I know I'm talking to one person. Okay. If anyone else can put their cameras on, it'll be very helpful. Otherwise, I might get very bored of myself. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Silverman. Okay, so let's begin this discussion with a famous story that the Rebbe repeated. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes this in a letter about how he was once traveling on a train. He says it was in 1907, I think. Tafresh Ayin Gimel. I think he said it was in 1907, if I'm not mistaken. No, 1917. Tafresh Ayin Gimel would have been 1917. It was in 1917. He was on a train, and on the train, it was during obviously the revolution. He says they were celebrating 300 years to something in Russia. And of course, you can imagine 1917 on a train in Russia, there's nothing to talk about other than what do we think about all the isms, communism, anarchy versus socialism. The Frierdiker Rebbe brings those three terms. I'm not sure. I don't understand these systems. I'm not sure how anarchism and socialism, they seem to be on two different. To me, it sounds like all isms are great for discussion. So they were having this whole discussion. Which one is the best method? Frierdiker Rebbe said, as a good Jew, he knew to stay out of the conversation. If I understood the letter correctly, it was that there were some priests, like Christians, that were a part of this conversation. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I kept quiet until some of my Bakante Yidden, Jews that I knew, that I was friendly with, invited me into the conversation, and I had no choice but to give my opinion. So what was my opinion? So the Frierdiker Rebbe told them that it says, he didn't say these words, but I'm just going to elaborate a little bit on how he explained it, a little explanation to what he meant. It says, that Hashem looked into the Torah, and from the Torah, Hashem created the world. That means everything that exists in this world comes from Torah. And so therefore, the teaching of Torah, include in it all systems, because if the system is created in the world, that system has to be part of Torah. And it's just that then the humans take this system and then they adjust it to how they want it to be. And being that in this world, there's no good without bad and no bad without good. So therefore, we get systems that are not exactly the way they're meant to be, which means we get some messed up systems. So in simple terms, the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying, does Torah have socialism in it? Yeah, there's elements of socialism that can be found in Torah. Does Torah have communism in it? There's elements of communism we found in Torah. Does Torah have capitalism? It's interesting. In Russia in 1917, the three options were communism, anarchism, and socialism. Capitalism wasn't an ism that was even in thought. But obviously, from the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying that everything has a place in Torah. The question is, how do we take those ideas of Torah and use them in the proper way? And so what we're going to learn today about the tax system in Torah is, again, along these lines, that we're not here to say, oh, you see, the Torah uses this system, Torah uses this. We're not here, we're going to see the Torah doesn't use a universal, one system. The Torah has elements of each system together. That's one important thing to see today. The second thing is, and I want to make it very clear, the class today is not to analyze the American tax system to see if the American tax system is right or not. I am not going to go anywhere near that, and please don't bring it up either. If you have any comments about the American tax system, and if it fits with the Torah tax system, you can write an article, and I'll be happy to read it. But today's class is what we see in Torah. How Torah collects taxes. And so therefore, let's keep to that subject, and that way we'll be able to have a productive class here. So first of all, let's start with the first concept. Does the Torah B'chlal believe that we should get rid of all, there should be equality? The whole idea that there's rich people and poor people, because, before we even get to taxes, the first biggest question everyone's bothered by is, why is someone paying more taxes than me or less taxes than me? No one's worried about what they're paying. They're worried about what the other person's paying, right? There's no article in the newspaper that says I found someone that has the same tax bracket as me. I found the person who's paying less. Hayatach, and this guy's paying less or more. So does the Torah believe that everyone should be equal? Everyone should have an equal pay. Everyone should be equal when it comes to payment. So here's a very interesting medrash. There's multiple sources for this, but I'll start with a medrash. I'll just take one source here, a medrash that the Rebbe brings in a sicha. 1 second, it's on the top of the document here. Okay, here's a medrash on Parshas Mishpatim. The pasuk says, "Talva es ami," you should lend money to my nation. So Amr David lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So David HaMelech tells the Eibishter, Ribono Elamim, Master of the universe. Yeshiv Tiyashe. Okay, this got messed up here with the Yeshiv Olam Lifnei Elikim. Tiyashe Elamecha Elamcha b'Shabbat. Now he takes a pasuk from Tehillim that says Yeshiv Olam Lifnei Elikim. The world sits before Hashem. So he translated it. What the Medrash says, what was David HaMelech telling Hashem? Tiyashev Elamcha. Settle your world b'Shabbat, that everyone should be equal. Hashidu v'aniyim. Rich and poor should all be equal. David HaMelech was asking the Eibishter to equalize everyone before Hashem. So Amar Loi, in the world. Amar Loi, so Hashem responded, In Kain Chesed ve'emes man yitzaru. That's the end of the pasuk. So the Medrash is darshaning the pasuk as a discussion between David and the Eibishter. Everyone's going to be poor. Where everyone's going to do rich, who's going to be able to do kindness? In other words, David HaMelech was asking Hashem, why are they rich and poor? Let everyone be rich, or let everyone be poor. Everyone should be equal. We should have an equal playing field in this world. And Hashem said, but then who's going to do kindness? In other words, what the Medrash is telling us here is that the Eibishter created the world in a way that it's necessary for there to be givers and receivers, because that's how we create chesed in this world. The Eibishter puts into the fabric of creation the need for there to be chesed. There's actually another beautiful story in the Igros of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe writes about how the Rebbe Marash would travel to collect money for the communities. The Rabbeim were very active in setting up communities, agriculture communities, which was the only place where the Jews were allowed to live in Russia, in order that they should have that parnassus. The Rebbe Marash was going around collecting money for these poor people. And he came to a city, I think it may have been Kremenchuk, a big city with a lot of cities. And the people were not being very responsive. The Rebbe was not, the funds were not coming in as the Rebbe Marash would want. So the Rebbe Marash came to the big shul to say Maimer. And he gets up to give the Maimer. And in the Maimer, he explains how the entire world was created, that the Eibishter created the world in a way that there has to be a mashpia mekabel. That everything in the world is male and female. Even in Home Depot, you want to go buy a pipe, they ask if you want the male or the female. Everything in the world is mashpia and mekabel. That's the way the Eibishter created the world. The sun and the moon. Explain up in Kabbalah and Chassidus, a deep Maimer. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes which Maimer it is. I forget where it is. The Frierdiker Rebbe, it's printed. The Maimer is printed that the Rebbe Marash said. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that in the middle, and so part of that is the Rebbe Marash explained that the part of it, this medrash, I don't know if he quotes this medrash, but again, this is a concept that's brought in Gemara also, that this concept that Hashem made the world that there's rich and poor, in order that the rich should have to give to the poor. Again, there has to be a mashpia and a makabel. And then the Rebbe Marash said, but the poor person cries out to Hashem, and he tells Hashem, no problem, you have to have poor people in the world. Well, why me? Why should I be the poor person? And the Rebbe Marash stopped and he said, and he has a legitimate request, a legitimate complaint. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says that the entire shul cried together with the Rebbe Marash for the poor man's complaint. I don't know if they opened their pockets also or not, but they definitely, but the Rebbe Rash definitely moved them with the plight of the poor person. So again, clearly, we're not saying that there has to be poor people. We're not looking for any volunteers. The Rebbe actually spoke, but that it certainly has to be rich people. In other words, there has to be people that can take and that can give. The Rebbe spoke actually many times, including one of the last Chodesh Tevis. We're finishing up Chodesh Tevis, and Chodesh Tevis of Hatzvi-Bais. The Rebbe spoke, the last Rebbeingans, the Rebbe spoke about the idea that Yidden should be rich, and that the Nisoyan in the 1950s, right? The Rebbe had a discussion with another Rebbe, about what's better for Yidden to. There's challenges if you're rich. There's challenges if you're poor. And the Rebbe said, let's better deal with the challenges of being rich. The Rebbe wanted that Yidden should do well begashmias also. So there's certainly the idea of equality, that we should all be in an equal place, is not something that Chassidus is not something that Torah we see Torah doesn't embrace as at least in a gullus situation, where there has to be idea of chesed, and that requires rich and poor. The reality is, people aren't trying to flee to Cuba to live. People are trying to flee to the United States to live, right? So, allowing for there to be, for people to accumulate wealth is definitely something that the Torah allows, okay? The Torah encourages, as long as we remember that the purpose why the Eibishter gave us the wealth is in order to do chesed, in order to do kindness with other people.
That's Hashem's. Excuse me. That's what Hashem wants, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a government. We want to set it up so there will be poor and they're rich.
No. In other words, what we're saying is like this. That's a good point, Charlie. Let me pull that the fabric of creation is that there's going to be rich and poor. So to stop the rich from becoming rich, because everyone has to be on the same playing field, that's not what Torah is saying. That's the point. As long, though, as the rich recognize that their wealth was given to them by the Eibishter to help the poor. Okay, and actually, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, in the laws in the Torah, in the laws of tzedakah, he begins with what sounds like a sicha and a maimer, not Shulchan Aruch. He starts by saying that a person has to realize that all the wealth he has comes from Hashem, and Hashem gave it to you in order to give to the poor people. So again, yes, our job is to make sure that the poor aren't poor anymore. In other words, yes, if we can get everyone to be rich, that would be very nice. But the idea is that again, my main point wasn't that we shouldn't be getting rid of the poor. We should make sure there's always poor people. My main point was the other way, to make sure that we have a allowance. The question, one of the big questions is, do we have an allowance for people to be rich in Yiddishkeit? Absolutely. Again, remembering that it's the Eibishter giving us the money to give to the poor. So now that we know that we can have money, how much of it can I keep? How much do I have to give away? So I'll start by saying that there was a chassid. I'm not going to use any names here. I'll say who wrote the letter, but I'm not going to use any of the other names that are written in the letter. He wrote Rabbi Avram Paris, who was known as being a fiery chassid, a radical chassid, if you may. He wrote a letter to another chassid, and he was encouraging him to give the Rebbe money, to give money to the Rebbe for what the Rebbe needs. And he writes, don't be like this and this chassid, who gives the Rebbe plenty of money, but he makes sure that it's, like, oh, I give the Rebbe lots of money. Rather, give the Rebbe all your money and say, but I need a little bit back to support my family. So that is an extreme. Let's try to see if Torah has a better balance than that. We're not all about Avram Paris. So let's see if we can get a balance here. So there's the main issues that we'll talk here is we're going to see that there's various areas where you have to have tax. And by the way, Chaim Soblik narrowed in a 5-minute conversation with me the other day, narrowed it down into exactly the systems of how where taxes are to be spent and how the systems work in Torah. We're going to go along those lines that Chaim pointed out to me. So there's two areas. Number one, where are our tax money going? In other words, we have to set up this tax system. Where is the money going? And second of all, how is it being distributed? And how is it not being distributed? How's the system being structured? And for that, we'll look at three main questions. Should it be a progressive tax, which is what we have in the United States? Not everyone's on mute. I think everyone's on mute besides me, Chaim. Should we tax on a progressive tax rate, which is what we have in the United States, that the richer you are, the more of a percentage you pay, which means that in addition to the fact that because you have more money, even if we gave the same amount, let's say 10%, but because you have more money, you're going to be giving more money, like it's in the United States, the more money you have, the higher tax bracket you're in. Second idea is let's do a flat tax. A flat tax meaning that everyone is going to give the same amount of money. Okay? Which means that $5 per head, what the Gemara calls a head tax. Karga, I think it's the name the Gemara uses. A head tax per person. A third element, or per household, if you may. A third element would be, another side to that would be, if we have a flat rate, though, as we said before, it depends on how much money you have, so that's how much you're going to be given. So let's see how the Torah goes into this regard. So first, let's start with where is our money going? If we're going to give tax, what was that, Shalom?
Yes, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
You're saying how much money he has, but isn't it really the income?
Yeah, so we'll point that out soon. We'll point that out when the Torah does go according to your how much money you have. We'll point out that it's not about how much money you currently have, but it's how much of your income. Yes, that we will. Well, actually, it depends. We'll get to that. I'll point that out. Shalom. So let's talk about three areas where tax money should go. Again, we're not talking about where the United States tax money goes. I don't know, and that's not the discussion today. Our discussion is of a Jewish community, building a structure of a community, a country, a city, a community, whatever it is, based on Yiddishkeit, where, when they would have to collect money, where would they expect that tax money to go? So one of them would be, as a Jewish or as beside Yiddishkeit, part of our tax money would have to go for the religious infrastructure. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, that would mean the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash. Our days, that would be a shul, Teiras, and educational system. In the times of the Torah, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, that would include the Kohanim, the Leviim, who, as the Torah says, L'hoides nasan, that Hashem gave them. Hashem appointed the Kohanim and the Leviim to be the teachers, to be the educators of Yidden, which is, by the way, we have a Chaim Sobuk's a Kohen. I don't know if we have any other Kohanim online here, or Shalom Kohen is a Kohen. Don't think that if you're in the times of Beis HaMikdash, you hung out of Beis HaMikdash all the time, unless you're a Kohen Gadol. I don't know, maybe. I won't put it past you to being qualified Kohanim Gedolim. But if you are just one of the Kohanim worked in the Beis HaMikdash twice a year, plus, I think on Yom Tovim they also could have come. So besides the Yom Tovim, the Kohanim and Leviim worked in the Beis HaMikdash only twice a year. What do you do the rest of the year? What were the Kohanim and Leviim supposed to do the rest of the year? I mean, eating truma, maisis, and animals takes up a lot of time. But what was their job the rest of the year? The Torah says that the job of a Kohen and a Levi is to be the spiritual leaders of the Yidden. Similar to what we just see in these week's parshas, that while the Yidden were Mitzrayim, the Leviim were the spiritual leaders. As Rashi said, and there's a famous sikha from the Rebbe on this, that when Parei told Moshe, L'chul l'siv l'seichem, go to your work, that Parei also understood that the Jews need spiritual leaders. And so therefore, Shevet Levi were set aside as being spiritual leaders and did not need to work in Mitzrayim. And this continued as the Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, that the Leviim, the Kohanim and the Leviim, were spiritual guidance, counselors for the Yidden. So that is one area where money needed to go. You need to be able to support the spiritual infrastructure of Yiddishkeit. Second, social services. The poor people need all their social services that are needed for the poor. As a community, we have a responsibility, as we said, to take care of the poor. That was a collective force of tzedakah. This was something that was in effect in a manner of coercion, of actually forcing people to pay a tax to give tzedakah to the poor, even in communities in Europe. By the way, all these taxes were in a sense, in some ways, in Europe, some of them had very strong infrastructure of communities where they were able to enforce these. There's some communities even today that have a similar setup where people have obligatory taxes to the community through which the community then takes care of their spiritual and social services.
And would that be considered tzedakah?
Yes, this would be collected tzedakah as that's, yes. So we're talking here as a tax that goes to tzedakah. Again, I'm not talking about how it works in the United States. It's a very interesting class that actually could be taken separately. The fact that part of our tax money, when we pay taxes, part of that money does go to social services. Can that be considered tzedakah or not? That's a very interesting question. And that's but that's for a different class, because that's not the topic of today's class. But that is actually a very good question, because the reality is the United States government is giving money to the poor. Can the money I give to taxes then be considered as part of my tzedakah giving? Here we're talking about setting up a system which it's a Jewish system and a Jewish community, and therefore the money you're giving is going to tzedakah. The community leaders were the tzedakah collectors that would actually distribute tzedakah. So like here in Pittsburgh, we could give our money to Karen Rachem. Karen Rachem is asking us for our money. They're not levying taxes on us for their money. It's all voluntary. Whereas in a infrastructure of a community where the community leaders actually had the ability to enforce their taxes, there would be an element of money that would actually go to tzedakah. And third of all, like in every other community, you also need a community infrastructure, whether it's city infrastructure, armed forces, roads. I guess garbage collection is also important. And all police officers and so on. So those are the three areas where our taxes in current systems also, but again, also, I guess, I don't know that our money goes directly to a religious infrastructure, but current systems, the current system that Yiddishkeit would also have to include spiritual infrastructure, communal infrastructure, and social services. So how does that money go, and where does that money? So the first system, let's take a look at the religious infrastructure. We're going to divide that into into three, I will say. The first one will be the shul and its infrastructure. Well, we have our very first tax in the Torah, very clearly stated. And I'm not going to even bring it up as text because I think everyone's familiar with the Machzas HaShekel. The Machzas HaShekel was a tax that was levied by everyone. Everyone gave an equal number. It didn't matter, as the pasuk says, the rich didn't give more and the poor didn't give less. It was an equal tax on every person. Now, granted, a half a shekel is not a lot of money, but the reality is that here we have a half shekel, a one-time tax, a yearly tax, a yearly tax, began Rosh Chodesh Adar. They would announce it. Collection was due in time for Rosh Chodesh Nisan, where was the tax season. The new tax season in Yiddishkeit begins Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And so Rosh Chodesh Adar, they would start collecting that tax. A half shekel, that's it. But as everyone's familiar with Parshas Truma, where it speaks about the half shekel, but it also speaks about, actually Parshas Truma doesn't mention the half shekel directly. It also mentions that there was voluntary donations along with it. And as we have throughout the Torah, there's what in halacha, there in times of Beis Hamikdash, there was what's called the Bedek Habayis. The Bedek Habayis was the collection of voluntary donations that people gave to keep the Beis Hamikdash functioning. So here we have, as a tax, the Torah is giving a flat fee, coupled with the idea that there's going to be volunteer donors that are going to be able to fill it up to take care of the infrastructure. So it's somewhat of a balance where the Torah is telling us exact. Now, where did this money go? So everyone, if you ask anyone, just like off your head, what was the Machzas HaShekel used for? What does everyone answer? What was the Machzah Shekel used for?
The Mishkan, no?
Right. The Mishkan throughout the years, not just in the Mishkan, there was a Machzah Shekel that was used for the sockets, but the yearly Machzah Shekel, where did it go for?
Was it the daily carbon?
The daily carbon, the carbon tummy, the Rashi, because Rashi says that. But here's a Mishnah, you'll be surprised. The Mishnah has a little bit more than just a carbon tzibur. Let's take a look. The Mishnah says, Hatruma ma'ayaisim. What do they do with the truma? The truma refers to the Machzah Shekel. Right? The first thing, as Ariel says, the first thing is they would bring the daily karbanos, as well as the carbon musaf, as well as the oimer shtei lechem apanim, the chol karbanos tzibur. The daily carbon was only part of the communal sacrifices. There was multiple communal sacrifices, particularly over Yom Tovim. But now take a look. What about shoymrei smichim hashviyos? Those who guard the aftergrowth of the 7th year? There was a whole system to make sure that the Shemitah was being kept properly. This year's a Shemitah year. That required the court to hire shomrim, to hire guards. Where did they get paid from? Machzas HaShekel. Yossi says a shemichinam, whatever. Okay, machlekes there. Next, what about the parah aduma? You need a parah aduma. The Sorei HaMishtaleach, when they would send the scapegoat on Yom Kippur together with the Lashon Shel Zahiris, the scarlet came and the strip of scarlet that came with it. They come from Trumas Halishka. What about the kevesh, the parah, the ramp that the parah aduma would go on? Those that learned 3 chapters of Rambam, today we began learning of the laws of parah aduma. One of the things we'll learn is that the parah aduma was brought over ramps into the base of it in order to make sure there's no tumah. You have to build that the kevesh of the Sorei HaMishtaleach, as well as a ramp that was necessary for the scapegoat. Here, let's get to the more here. Amas hamayim, there needed to be pools of water. The walls of the city of Yerushalayim and its towers. The chol tzarich here, all the needs of the city came from the Machzah Shekel. So here we see the Machzah Shekel wasn't just about a Machzah Shekel for a karbonis. There was a lot of infrastructure that was being taken from this Machzah Shekel, the infrastructure of the infrastructure, we can say, of the Beis Hamikdash and of Yerushalayim as a whole. And so therefore, in this regard, we see here that the Torah gave that there's a tax here that's levied on the people to have the infrastructure of Yerushalayim, of the Beis Hamikdash, or the Mikdash Ma'at. That would mean that nowadays, and we'll see soon the Mishnah, the halacha that says so, and nowadays, in replacement of the Beis Hamikdash, it's acceptable for there to be a tax levied on people to make sure that our spiritual infrastructure, that our Beis Hamikdash, that our Mikdash Ma'at should have all that it needs in order to function. That would include, here we have the Torah gives us a flat rate, but again, it's all based on the fact that there was also at the same time individual donations that came along with it. What about education? So here comes the Gemara says that Yeshua ben Gamla instituted that there needs to be Jewish education in each city. That every city has to have appoint teachers. You can't rely on parents teaching their children. You can't rely on volunteers. There needs to be an educational infrastructure. And here is how the Alter Rebbe codifies it. Again, this is what it looks like. I am not going to comment on how yeshivas tuition committees should take this halacha, but I'm just going to show, and because there's obviously more to it than just this, and there's actually, by the way, another interesting class can be different opinions of whether you can use tzedakah money for tuition based on how the obligations of tuition are, where that falls in. Again, interesting information for other classes. Here we're talking about just to see what the taxes would be. So take a look what Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch about how we codify nowadays this halacha. I couldn't find it in English. I'm not sure I'm not sure why I couldn't find this in English online, but at least here it's in Hebrew. Schar melamdei tinoikos, the salary for teachers. Takonos chachamim, and by the way, just as an interesting point, there's a difference between children and bar mitzvah children. In Altein is talking about here melamdei tinoikos, teaching children. He's not talking about that in halacha. There's a difference in where money comes for the age of your child, if they're bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah or not, just as a side point. So the schar melamdei tinoikos, takanas chachamim haisa, the chachamim made a takana, lifroya mikupas hakal, that the community tax should pay for all the children in the city, both bnei ashir v'aniyim, the children of the rich and of the poor, yachad together. In other words, the chachamim made a takana that there should be a tax levied for the community, and that part of those taxes should go to pay for all children's education. Now, in our countries, meaning the minig in Europe was that that everyone should pay for their own children. In other words, you have to pay your own tuition if you could afford it. Someone who cannot afford it, so then we have a takanas chachamim that the community has an obligation to make sure that the community tax is going to be able to pay for the children of those that cannot afford tuition. The poor people could force the rich people to pay from the communal tax. In other words, the rich people say, I'm paying my own kids, so why should I pay for the communal tax? The communal tax is I put money into communal tax too. Doesn't work like that. Even though people are paying for their own tuition, but for those that can't afford it, the communal tax could be applied to it. Not only that, not only that, a rich person could force another person to pay, even though there's people that are paying taxes that don't have children in the system. Why? Because this was the takanas chachamim. That every city should have teachers for children. Whether it's a large city or a small city. And that all the people in the city should collectively participate in paying this and paying their salaries. And now look at what Altein says. How should they pay? Each person according to how much they can afford. Even if they don't have children. Like all other taxes that go according to your income. So Altein is saying here that the income that the Chachamim were misakin, that the communal tax should go towards education. But this tax system is the Altein says clearly, was set up in accordance to how much your earnings are. So this wasn't a flat tax on the community. This was a tax that was according to wealth. So Altein here doesn't say exactly how that system was done, but he says it clear that there was a difference between that. It wasn't a flat tax like a machzah shekel. It was a tax taken in accordance to your wealth. So just to go back now, yes, Yosef.
So in those days when people gave you tzedakah as a tax, did they have people coming to their door? They go to the government and get the money that I just gave you.
You know the story about the non-Jew who asks his Jewish neighbor. He says, "Why is it that I have burglars in my home all the time, and you have, I never see them coming to your house?" And Jew says, "Oh, we have a mezuzah and Hashem protects us." The non-Jew says, "Really? Can I have one?" Says, "Yeah, take one." So the non-Jew takes a mezuzah, he puts on his door, and sure enough, the burglars stop. But 3 weeks later, he comes banging on the Jew's door. He says, "You know what? Take your mezuzah back." He goes, "What happened? It didn't work." He goes, "It worked. The burglars stopped coming, but those people knocking on the doors now for the money, they don't stop coming 5 a night." So I don't know. L'chora, yeah, there is. We see clearly in halacha that even though they had all these systems set up, people would still be going from door to door collecting. They would go from city to city collecting. So obviously, there's no system that really gets rid of the poor people going to collect. And again, maybe this was part of the fabric Hashem wanted, that there should always be people going around collecting. So I don't know. I think also might have to do a very simple cheshbon. I live in a city, they tax everyone. Let's say in this city, the most they can tax and the most they can get, they can give me $1,000 a month. I'm like, the next town over, there's millionaires. I'll go knock on their door. I'll get my $1,100, right? So I think no matter, no one's ever satisfied. So I don't think we'll ever be able to get rid of the knocking at the door issue. By the way, take a look. Who was here this week? Right, they were here to collect for Satmar Bikur Cholim. If I'm not mistaken, the Satmar community in New York today, they're, as you know, Satmar is a very tight community. I'm pretty sure that they have tax systems in their community of where the people pay in and that money goes to tuition and infrastructure. I don't know exactly, but I once heard, I don't know. I don't know factually and what it exactly is. I once heard that they still have the European model of collecting from collecting. I mean, look, I know I was thinking of it a few weeks ago. I was driving through Williamsburg and I see it says Satmar Meat Store. What's like, imagine saying Lubavitch Meat Store. What's Lubavitch Meat Store? Like which, what does that mean? And I think it might have to, I don't know, but I was thinking maybe it has to do that. It's like a communal, which I don't know. But the point is that they still come to collect money, right? They still have people going door to door because if what I'm saying is true, there's always a need for more money. So, yep, Yosef, you're always going to have a knock on the door. Just be happy you don't live in New York where you get several knocks a night, not several knocks a week or a month. Okay, so nowadays, look what it says in Shulchan Aruch. We force people of the city can force each other. We can force each other to collect money, to pay a tax in order to build a shul, in order to get a Sefer Torah, in order to buy Nevi'im, meaning in order to buy Svarim. So we clearly see here that the Torah does the halacha. That was a mission, I believe, that there's a obligation in order to be able to collect, that a community is able to fund a shul, to fund the religious infrastructure that was at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, should that be a flat tax? How should that tax work? In those times of the Beis HaMikdash was a flat tax. That Mishnah or that Brisa didn't say how it is. It just says everyone has to participate. So the Machzis HaShekel says that in a place that there is no established custom, then one should follow the principle of the law and collect the entire need according to wealth. He says that if there's no established law, it should go according to wealth. And he's commenting on, I'm sorry, I should have gone back. The Ramah says that we should do half and half. Half of it should be a per capita, meaning each person, each family participates a set amount, and the other half should be according to wealth. The Machzis HaShekel is saying that if there's no established custom, then better, the whole entire sum should be in accordance to wealth. But again, he doesn't either say what in accordance to wealth works. And we'll find it interesting, we'll finish the class with an interesting halach and Shulchan Aruch, which I think will clarify that. Yes, Yosef.
All right, so I'm not clear if according to wealth, if you do a flat percentage.
That's what I'm saying. He doesn't say that.
It's more than it's like the tier system.
Right. So I don't know. He doesn't say that. So I'm not sure which one he's referring to. But at the end of the class, I think we'll have a halacha that will clarify all of this in its own solution. Okay, so far we took care of the religious infrastructure, except and we for nowadays we took care of the religious infrastructure because we took care of the shul, we took care of the community leaders as the teachers as they're getting money from a collected accordance to wealth. In the times of the Torah, and I'll go through this very quickly, just because everyone's familiar with this in this class. The way this class was written in JLI was for people that didn't have this background. So I'm just going to go through very quickly all the different taxes that would go on if you were living in the times of the Beis HaMikdash to support the Kohanim and the Leviim that we mentioned before were the spiritual leaders of the Yidden. So let's start like this. First of all, you started your field. Before you were able to take any crop, there's paya. Paya are the corners. How much? The Torah doesn't say. It just says you have to leave your corners. The Chachamim said 1.7%. In halacha, it's called 1/60th. 1/60th, I guess, is 1.7. Does that make sense? Is it 1/60th or? Let me look back here.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so 1.7. Then they would take bikurim. The first fruits were brought to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, bikurim is a little interesting because on one hand, it's a tax. It went to the kohen, the kohenim got it. On the other hand, I don't know that bikurim, and I think there's a lot in halacha about this. That bikurim, in other words, theoretical halacha now, not but in discussions in Mefarshim and Gemara, whether bikurim is considered a tax to the kohen or it's giving to the Eibishter, and the kohenim took it on behalf of the Eibishter. Either way, the kohenim got their bikurim 1 point. Again, no number given in the Torah, but again, the Chachamim said 1.7. Truma, then you have to give the kohen truma. Again, the Torah doesn't give us a number. We know that here the Chachamim were a little bit more flexible. They said anywhere from 1/40th, 1/50th, 1/60th, but the Beinani, the average, the expected average would be 1/50th. In other words, 2%. Then you gave the Levi Meiser. That's 10%. Then you gave either Meiser Sheni, which would mean you would take it to Yerushalayim to eat in Yerushalayim. So Meiser Sheni is a little bit interesting because on one hand, you got the benefit from it. But on the other hand, you needed to eat it in Yerushalayim. And what was the purpose? It was a way of funneling money into Yerushalayim. Because Yerushalayim was so built around the Beis Hamikdash, how do you make sure there's always, commerce in Yerushalayim? By forcing people to use their money in Yerushalayim, the fruits in Yerushalayim, which for the most part were actually exchanged for cash. That money went to Yerushalayim. When I went to Eretz Yisrael to learn in Yerushalayim, my uncle Rabbi Yisrael Darren gave me money. Usually gives someone shliach mitzvah money, right? He says, I'm going to give you my sasheni money. In other words, he's going to give me spending money in Yerushalayim. So instead of the dollar for there, he gave me $20. He said, here's my sasheni money. Go spend it in Yerushalayim. So the Meiser, so even though here we're considering Meiser Sheni as part of it, I think when Meiser Sheni is there, I'm not so comfortable calling that as part of the tax because ultimately you got the benefit from it. However, some of the other years you didn't give Meiser Sheni, you gave Meiser Ani. You actually gave that money to poor people. So in that year it was clearly a tax. So if you take a calculation of here, of what we said, 1.7 plus 2 plus 10 plus 10 is 23.3% of your crop. Now, I will say that it's really not very accurate because it went from the remainder, right? So it's really a little less because, your Meiser is not 10% of your total. Your Meiser is 10% of what's left after your Truma, Bikurim, and Peah. So it's a little less than 23.3%. And we'll let the mathematicians make the exact number. But that's a very high tax rate, by the way, just for the kohen. But you did take care of tzedakah here, Meiser Ani, let's say. But that's and don't forget, the Torah is assuming, and the Torah is written in a time where agriculture was the main source of income. So you have a high income here. Chaim Solo did bring up, what did this Zvulun? He wished he was part of Shevet Zvulun because they were busy on the ships. They didn't have all this agriculture. But I'm not sure if they didn't have any agriculture there, but they certainly had. Let's a couple people in. They certainly also had other sources of income. But in any case, this Meiser, this is, by the way, besides all the leket shikha, the other agriculture stuff that were left behind. This is besides the animals. The kohenim also got the mitzvah that's still relevant today, actually, also to give the kohen certain parts of the animal as well. not just by the karbonis, even animals they ate themselves. The bechar, the firstborn animals went to them. These Kohanim and Leviim, no one should complain. They ate well. They got plenty of agriculture, plenty of fruits, and plenty of stuff to go along with it. So, in that regard, we were giving a lot of taxes there in the agriculture farm. Another thing Chaim was telling me today, once I'll get you in a second, Yosef. One of the things Chaim was bringing up to me today was maybe nowadays that we don't do in agriculture, we should go with another form of food that we're providing. But I'm not sure if the Torah's element was to give food, or the Torah's element was that there's going to be a certain amount of money that was given as a result of agriculture being the source. But good thought thinking there. Yes, Yossi.
So for the person who wasn't agricultural, there is no system in the Torah to provide tax. If you don't have a field, you don't have cows, and you're bringing in gold galore from travels, there's no tax.
So there comes, so you don't have agriculture obligations, but you would have, now we'll go to tzedakah. And there's opinions, there's a big machlokes. I mentioned before, a machlokes of whether you can use your machlokes and the research of whether you can use your tzedakah money, your meiser money for tuition and stuff. Part of that discussion would be, is meiser ksafim, giving meiser from your income, min ha-Torah or midrabanan? Meaning, does the Torah say, the Torah says, aser b'shvil shetis aser. Is that a mitzvah which the Gemara, the Medrash learns in their meiser ksafim, to give money of your income? Is that a drasha from the pasuk to say that the Torah says you also have a biblical obligation to give meiser from your income, or is it just midrabanan? I think that will fall into that discussion. But in any case, you have another mitzvah. So the tax of giving to the Kohen and the Levi, don't forget that money was going to the Kohen and the Levi. The only thing was the years that you gave Meiser Ani, that would go to the poor people. If you don't have the agriculture, so you were out of that 10% that went to the poor person. So again, if Meiser Ksafim is Minat Torah, so it came out of there. But then there's another mitzvah, a separate mitzvah, unrelated to giving Meiser. There's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. And how much money is the obligation in giving tzedakah? So we're used to hearing meiser. Well, let's take a look where that comes from. Says in Shulchan Aruch. I'll make this a little smaller so you'll get Hebrew and English at the same time. Whoops, what did I just do? Okay. Shir Nisinasa. The shir of this is from Shulchan Aruch, from the Beis Yosef. Shir Nisinasa. How much tzedakah should one give? Im yadei maseges, if you can afford it. Kefi soirech haniyim, however much the poor people need. No number. As if a poor person is in need and you have the funds to give, you have an obligation to give whatever they need. If you can't afford to give what the poor people need, the best is to give at least a fifth of your income, 20%. The echad masara, 10%, is mida beinanis, is average disposition. Mikan ayin ra, less than 10% is being stingy. What are they? Less than 1/10 is niggardly. I don't know, whatever that word is. Mikan ve'elech. Now this goes to, and now the chaymish zesha amru. This goes to Shalom's question. The chaymish zesha amru. This fifth, or at least the 10th that was mentioned. Shana rishayna ma'akeret. That's only the first year of a person of your principal. From here and all, the fifth of the profits in succeeding years. Okay, so this is what Shalom mentioned before. The first time you're going to give tzedakah, you need to take from your capital, whatever you have. Thereon, it's only on capital gains. It's only on your gains or your all income, whatever your gains are. So yes, once you gave your tzedakah properly, then you could just give from your income.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi, in Eretz Yisrael, do the kibbutzim and the other type of farms that are there, do they take meiser and all these things?
That's why Eretz Yisrael is the opposite of America. In America, when you go into a supermarket, the first thing you need the one area that you don't have to worry about is the agriculture section. All your fruits and fresh fruits and vegetables, as long as they grew in America at least, are kosher. My sister lives in a city where there's not a lot of kosher food, and the supermarket put up a sign in the fruits and vegetables department, kosher section. That's the kosher section. In Eretz Yisrael, where everyone thinks everything is kosher, it's Israel, everything is kosher. Actually, that's where you have to start worrying, not only about all the other areas on the supermarket, but also in the agriculture section of a supermarket. The fruits and vegetables, you have to make sure there's a proper hechsher, that trumas, maishus, this year Shemitah is another big issue, to make sure that everything is done properly. So actually, Eretz Yisrael is a major concern when it comes from there, as a result of the trumas and maishus. So you have to know it's not that you can't eat it, you just have to make sure that there's a proper hechsher. And that's actually something that's relevant also when you buy fruits and vegetables in the United States of America that come from Israel. Trumas and maishus have to be taken off unless there's a hechsher on them. Now that it's a Shemitah year, we'll have another issue with Shemitah fruits as well.
This is Shemitah year there.
Yes, so therefore that brings another level, but not this discussion of today's class. Okay, so we dealt with taking care of the poor, the social services, as well as the spiritual infrastructure. What about the public works? What about the structure of paying for the upkeep of the city and of the country? So here, once again, let's take a look at a Mishnah. The residents of a courtyard can compel each inhabitant of that courtyard to financially participate in the building of a gatehouse and the door to the courtyard. The Mishnah, the three dots, is that the Mishnah has a machlokes there if every courtyard requires a door, that if you can force on every door. But it's not really relevant to us. The point is that an infrastructure that's necessary, you can force each other to pay, as well as to pay for the Ir Chaimad L'Saimer Briach, and as a city as a whole, you can pay all the people of the city should contribute to the building of the wall, the doors that protect the city. Now, obviously, the Mishnah over here is talking about small terms, right? This is a small tax, a tax on the people in the neighborhood and on the city. But the idea is that there is a way you can force people to pay for the infrastructure. And here comes the first time in our class that we'll have a straightforward discussion of how you collect it. So Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Yochanan, Kishahin Goivin, when they collect the money, do they collect based on the number of people living in each house, or do they collect based on the net worth of each person? So here is the question: Do you collect per person, or do you collect per wealth? So Rabbi Yochanan responded, Lefi momin goivin. It's according to the wealth. You take in accordance to how wealthy each person is. So my son Elazar, fix a nail into this. Knows this is the halacha. Continues the Gemara. Ikad Amri. There's another version to this discussion. When they collect according to how close you are, which means how much you require it, according to how much money you have. In other words, if you're putting a wall around the city, who's protected most by that wall? The closer you are to the wall, the better you're protected, right? Because the Ganav is going to come into the city, they'll ransack the closest house. So Amalei, he told him, listen to this, they collect based on the proximity of the houses of the wall. That the more you benefit from the tax, or not from the tax, from the infrastructure, the more you have to pay. I think that would mean that, I guess, let's say in a modern case, let's say water infrastructure, it's not how much water you use. That's a different consumption. But let's say if they have to put new water pipes, should you then measure how much each person is paying or to go for the house. I don't know. But here, look at what Taisa says though. On the second opinion, Taisa says, again, I couldn't find this in English, but here it's in Hebrew. According to the second version, that the halacha is that you pay according to the house. Pirush Rabbeinu Tam explained that it's not so simple. Aniyim kravim yosim rechaykim. Poor people that are closer pay more than poor people that are further. Also, the richer, the ones that are rich, closer. Listen to this. The wealthy that live further than the poor that are closer pay more. Because they also pay in accordance to how much money they have. In other words, from what I understand, I'll be very honest, I didn't go opening up the Taisus and Mefarshim to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. But from my simple reading of this Taisus, it seems to me what Taisus is saying is that the question wasn't, do we go according to the proximity or according to the wealth? The question is, do we go according to the proximity or also according to the wealth? Which means that a rich person that's close is going to pay top. The rich person that's distant is going to pay next. The poor person that's close is going to pay third, and the poor person that's distant is going to pay even less. So there's a real progressive system here of based on how much you're benefiting and how much you are, and how much wealth you have. So to me, it sounds like it's a the infrastructure of the city, right? This is the only place where we've seen this language. For the infrastructure of a city, it's a complex tax system where we have to mix together both the people's wealth and how much they're benefiting before we tax them.
Did they give any clues of how they did it?
What? Oh, so I don't know what we did with Poel, but take a look at this halacha. We'll conclude with this. Kol tzarchei tzibur, and that's why I said at the end of the class, we'll have one reading that will put everything into place. This is from Shulchan Aruch. I think this is the final. Yeah. Kol tzarchei tzibur, she'nichayim lahashas atzmon. Whenever a community is not able to come to an agreement about what the tax should be, all the heads of the household that pay the taxes should gather together. They should accept upon themselves that everyone's going to say their opinion l'shem shemayim. In other words, this is not a political debate. This is not your interest. This is not your benefits. This is l'shem shemayim, what you really think is the right thing to be done. And then you take a vote and you follow the majority. If the minority refuses to go along, the majority can force them, even to take them to court, to a goyish court. To force them to pay. And they have to pay their participation. And if someone abstains from sharing his opinion, so based on the opinion of the one who refuses to say the opinion is nullified, and we follow the majority of the Roiv of those that did give their opinion. So the Ramah, I think this is the Ramah. I don't think it's Shulchan Aruch, I think it's the Ramah. But he's saying that if you can't figure out the tax system, you take a vote, and everyone has to follow the majority. So I think in a certain sense, this clarifies, exactly which way things went. The bottom line is, if you can't figure it out, you take a vote, which I think is also what we do in the United States. At least on some tax measures, they take votes on how it should be done. So to summarize, in Yiddishkeit, there is taxes. I think someone wrote on last week's chat that all tax is theft. I'm assuming it didn't mean the taxes that the Torah is telling us we have to pay here. In Yiddishkeit, there's lots of taxes. We have a pretty high tax rate here in Yiddishkeit. Number one, in order to support our spiritual infrastructure, that's both the shuls and all the spiritual needs, the leaders, the spiritual leaders, as well as an educational system. I would assume going into that is also mikvahs and all that. And for that, we saw that the Torah gave us a flat rate, along with an expectation that there's going to be voluntary donations. Halacha said that there should be the halacha debates how it should be done nowadays, and the Machzah Shekel said again. There's probably other opinions, but at least the Machzah Shekel said half of it should be a flat rate, half of it should be according to wealth. Maybe that's the idea of a flat shul membership fee could maybe fit into that. Again, we're not passing how things should go, just trying to see a parallel to that. Then we have the social, and by the way, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, part of that spiritual infrastructure were the Kohanim and the Leviim, and they had a huge tax percentage going to them in order for them to be supported. Finally, and then we have the social service infrastructure. There we saw that in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, again in times of the Beis HaMikdash, in times there was a Meiser Ani, but in Halacha there's a separate mitzvah of giving tzedakah, and there we saw Shulchan Aruch saying that 20% is great, 10% is average and is what's expected. Less than that, not in a good situation. But if you have the means, you should be giving as much as you can to help all the poor people, whatever they need. In other words, even from Shulchan Aruch, it seems that when a poor person needs help, you don't say, sorry, I already gave my 20%. I have $7 million in the bank, but I already gave 700,000 to tzedakah. So I guess you'll have to die because I gave my 50%, 20%, 10%. I gave 1.4 million, but I gave 20%, but I still have 5.6 in the bank. I'm sorry, you're poor, I can't help you. No, we have an obligation to help the poor. The question does come over here: how does that fit an individual versus the community? So that's a separate discussion. But there's again in the times, actually not in all the way through history, the Yiddish communities had a kupas tzedakah, where they would collect this money for tzedakah from people. It wasn't just people giving to individuals; it was people giving as a tax to the community to help the poor. Nowadays, certainly in the United States, we don't have that ability to necessarily force people to give their money that way. I don't think any Jewish community would survive if the rabbi would say either give, you need to pay to the kupas tzedakah of the city. You have to give Karen Rachem $10,000, otherwise you're not going to get an aliyah and shul. You can't be a part of the minyan. I don't think that will work nowadays, but there were times that's how tzedakah was being collected. And finally, we spoke about the infrastructure tax, that there was the halacha does allow for there to be a forced infrastructure tax. And from what we saw in the Gemara, it was a mix of how much you benefited from it and how much wealth you had that decided how much you would pay. And we finally concluded that the Ramah says whenever you have a difficulty in figuring out a tax, take a vote, and everyone is obligated to follow the vote, whether you've voted with it or not. Yes, Yosef.
So obviously some of the mitzvahs are clear in the Torah, Ma'aser, Ma'aser Sheni, Ma'aser Ani, but in the whole general gist of taxes, are these other taxes still considered mitzvah? They deraisa, they were derabbanan?
No, takanas chachamim. There would be takanas chachamim. There would be takanas. Even if
doing a mitzvah.
Well, it's a mitzvah to listen to what the chacham tell you to do.
So it's more meritorious than to pay Jewish taxes than to pay other taxes that don't have a mandate.
Well, here you can argue that the halacha is dina de malchus adina. So when you're paying taxes, you're paying according to Torah, because the Torah requires you to follow the law of the land. So actually, and Chaim Solik sent me a few articles about that. I told him I wasn't going to go down that path, but because we're not going to talk about the current tax system, but there is when you pay your current tax system, you're following a mitzvah. Perhaps even when you stop by a red light, you're doing a mitzvah, because the din malchus dina, you have to follow the law of the land. So stopping by a red light can be a mitzvah besides the mitzvah shmartem snafshe seichem. But I will conclude with a story that the Rebbe said about the Rogatchover. That the Rogatchover one time got a tax bill, and he paid one and he didn't pay the other. So why are you paying the other? He says, because I'll be paid, I don't have to pay this one. He brought the Gemara. I think it's actually this Gemara that we quoted with the Tosfos, and there the Gemara also speaks about what time the Chacham pay, what Chachamim don't pay. A short while later, he got another letter from the government. There was a mistake. He didn't have to pay that tax. But not because of the Gemara, but because of whatever their tax system. And the Rebbe said that when you lead Rogatchover and you live your life on Torah, so it's poyel, that is the law, that's how the law works for you. But if you're not, the Rebbe didn't say this part, but if you're not the Rogatchover, then don't rely on what the Gemara says, because the tax, not necessarily is that going to work. Similar to what the Living Torah today, right? If you're not the Rebbe, don't rely on taking orange juice for your medicine. You've got to follow what the law says. Then the Gemara's law will fall into the state law as well. In any case, that's for today's class. Thank you for listening. Next week, Emir Hashem will be the class on. I may have to cancel next week's class and push it to a following week. So please, these are, I guess, there'll be announcements, but those that are on the call, I see whoever's here are the usual participants. I may have to postpone next week's class for one more week. We will inform.
Last one on immigration?
No, the last one we did on immigration. The last one's going to be on paying. I think it was. I said it would be on paying ransom for hostages.
Okay.
Okay.
And a quick question: where did the Nesiim fit in with all this? I mean, I don't know that was that completely voluntary, or was they commanded to give?
It says that they were very wealthy, so I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, does that imply that there's an obligation? We should follow their lead. The wealthy people should.
Actually, this court, the class that I took this from was what JLI did for elections 2016. So that's when Trump was running. So the one of the classes here was who's fit to be a leader. And they would go through all these questions. If the wealthy should be leaders, should they be wealthy? And they had that question there. So I was skimming through. It wasn't on the relevance. I didn't read it through clear. I mean, I read it. I did this. What is it? It was almost 6 years. 6 years ago. So I didn't like that. I don't remember exactly what it said there. But I think what if I remember correctly, what the idea there was, it's not a question whether they should be wealthy. It's whether we should make them wealthy. In other words, we should be able to provide for them that they should be wealthy. There is precedence to this idea that leaders, but again, it also has to be taken into consideration that that's when wealth is being understood by the leaders as being as a means that we spoke about earlier, about being a means what Hashem gives them, versus having wealth and being manipulating people as a result of your wealth and therefore becoming a leader. So I think there's that balance there, that consideration. But again, the class did touch on that there.
Okay.
Not to bring up political discussions, but if you remember, Trump was very fond of also describing people where they physically looked fit to be the president. So part of the class there was also how does the physical look? They touched everything on that class. I don't remember giving it then. I don't think I would have given a class like that during such a heated. But I was reading it through now. I'm like, what? I can't believe this was part of the class back then that they went straight on those questions, but. That was addressed there.
Great.
Okay. Have a good tavach.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Thank you. Rabbi, that word was miserly. It means tight-fisted.
Oh, I skipped the miserly. I thought, okay, I would have seen miserly. I would have seen. I thought I saw something else there.
She means the word niggardly. It sounds terrible, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the swear word. It completely has no connection to it at all. It just sounds really bad.
Right.
What does it mean?
That's why they don't anymore.
It means
means miserly. Oh, that's what you're saying. So niggardly means miserly. Okay.
Yeah,
but as not, you're saying it's unrelated.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But every time people see it, they're like, what is this word?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.